This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. I'm thrilled today to visit with David Pivnick. David's a partner and leader at McGuireWoods. He's literally one of the smartest people that I ever get to work with and have seen work. We're going to talk to David today about really two topics. We're going to talk about what does it take to be great at something and why it's important. And then second, about bosses and supervisors and different types of bad bosses, bad supervisors, and the difference between excellence and arbitrariness and more. David, you've had a chance to, one, you yourself showed excellence and greatness. David, for a background, finished first in his law school class, which is just another way of defining greatness and achievement. So there's this thing, there's this great quote about pornography. You know it when you see it. That's an old quote from a famous Supreme Court case. But what about greatness? I mean, obviously LeBron, 40,000 points now, hard to argue that he's defined greatness. But in the work environment, what qualities, what do you see when you think of greatness? What's great versus just somebody mailing it in? Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And thank you for having me on and for the very kind introduction. I don't think you were directly comparing me to LeBron James, but I'm going to pretend that you were and humbly accept, but even if it's overstated. But look, first of all, I think your analogy to the Supreme Court's famous comments on pornography, when you see it, is an apt one, because I think there are a lot of sort of intangible skills and traits that great folks have that may or may not be, things that are easily perceived by others. I think the first thing is having a strong skill set and a lot of talent is very critical to doing great things and being great at your job, whatever your job or responsibility might entail. And that sort of talent and some innate ability, I think, is a threshold for entry into that discussion. I think the second thing that great athletes have, but I think great employees have, great bosses have, is hard work and a strong work ethic, a willingness to put in the time and hours, do what's necessary, refine their craft. Part of that, frankly, and I think people who are truly talented are also able to assess how best to use their time, both in managing their own time and in helping others manage their time, but also then being self-aware enough to realize their own strengths and weaknesses and where they should be devoting more efforts to both doubling down on strengths, but also to refining weaknesses. And then I think the two other things that I think are traits that help set people apart and really help people excel. One of them is consistency, which I think is easier said than done, but showing up every day with a level head, being able to put in the same effort and deliver high quality performance day in, day out, whether you're feeling a little sick, whether, there's something going on in your personal life, whatever it might be. Everybody has circumstances that come up and would otherwise be distractions, and being able to sort of get underneath that and focus and push through consistently day in, day out is something that I think sets great performers apart. And then the last thing I would note is initiative. The folks who are going to really excel are often folks who are going to take ownership of projects, again, whether that's sports and really taking ownership of a team and helping lead the team forward. Being a leader could be the same in an organization, but taking ownership, taking initiative, and not just doing what's asked of you, but really thinking about what is required for the sort of the greater good of the team or the project or the business, company, etc. And then trying to lead that and take steps on your own, I think is a really strong trait on folks who tend to excel.
But it's a fascinating perspective. I get out of that from what I heard you say, sort of this mix of innate talent, hard work, which includes this incredible discipline to never take a day off. It doesn't mean that you're not taking Sunday off and not getting a chance to recover, because to be great on an ongoing basis, you need time for recovery. But it means when you have a meeting, you always show up seriously to it. When you have a test, you always show up seriously to it. The same thing to a trial and negotiation, whatever it is, that you don't take one of those off. You take them all seriously. Most of us have good days and bad days. but the people that are great have a lot more good days than bad days at this. And then this sense of initiative that you're driving things forward. You're not just playing a role, you're actually driving things forward. When you look at the workplaces you've been associated, and is there a litigator? Is there a leader that when you think of greatness, that comes to mind? And what were some of those qualities that drove that when you look at that? Like if you were to look at, I mean, you're a litigator, you lead part of white-collar crime litigation and false claims litigation in healthcare, often for private equity-sponsored companies. When you look at senior litigators that are from at other firms, you don't have to name names, but is there an example of what looks to you like that's greatness at what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because as you were asking the question, in my mind's eye, am picturing two folks who actually have quite a bit in common. One of them is a leader and a mentor of mine at my prior firm, and one of them is someone I've had the opportunity to work with at my current firm, at McGuireWoods. And the biggest thing that I think they excelled at, and it related both to litigation and to working a case and to prepping for trial, but also, frankly, to the way they manage their teams and the firm in their leadership roles, is their ability to focus on the big picture and then quickly distill what is necessary from a big picture macro perspective into a bunch of different micro tasks and assignments and get everyone rowing in the same direction. And so working up towards a trial, it was figuring out, at a high level, what's our narrative? High level, what are our strengths, and how do we leverage those strengths and push into the strong narrative we're trying to put forward here and minimize any of the weaknesses. And then with the teams internally, it was really thinking about what is the firm strong at? What areas are we able to focus on? What is our group strong at? Where are the areas we're able to focus on? Identifying those weaknesses and then coming up with sort of a cohesive vision to help make the parts that are within that team or within the trial story come together. But it was the big picture vision that I think really stands out, and their ability to then communicate that vision in an articulate manner that had people buy in and rally around them, that resonates with me, and that I think has made them as effective as they are.
But I think your point is so well taken. This ability to see the big picture, to clarify what we're trying to do, what the narrative it is. Then also, whether through a chief operating officer, or chief of staff, another partner, or directly to organize all the things that have to be done that row towards that vision. And then to have somebody themselves or somebody else police that vision to make sure it actually gets prosecuted in the right way. Because often we see this disconnect between someone could do this, but can they run a team doing it? And they're two very different things. You could be excellent in a particular way, but in terms of being great, you probably also have to run a team to do things that great in any kind of scale or in a bigger project, and that requires also that prosecuting the team and working with the team on it as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question that is coming up more and more is this issue of supervisors and bosses. And I know boss might be an old line term, so I don't know if I'm even allowed to use it anymore, but distinguishing between a tough boss who drives for excellence and a bad boss who could be somewhat arbitrary. Any 2 cents on that issue?
I think it's interesting because I mean, there are some bosses who are probably bad bosses, but I think in terms of good bosses, I think it's very case and individual dependent, where I think there are folks who could be an excellent boss for one team, but be a lousy boss for another team. And I think coaches in professional sports or managers in baseball are a great example of that, where there are lots of coaches. Bill Belichick is the easiest example, completely mediocre at best, previous stops like in Cleveland, and then one of the best to do it when in New England. And it was a matter of, his own skills, developing, but also, frankly, the opportunities and the support and the structure that he had around him. And I think a lot of that applies with bosses too. More than anything else, it's figuring out the right mix of supervisory traits and skills with the team that's being led, and then adapting. And good bosses, I think one of their biggest skills is being able to adapt and recognize not every individual is going to be motivated the same way or react the same way to different approaches. And certainly on my own team, I have, I think, a good rapport with most of the folks on the team, but my interactions with them will vary based on their seniority, how long we've been working together, how well I know them. And frankly, because of that, I know how well they tick and what makes them get up in the morning, and I'm able to play to some of those strengths and factors individually. So I think the real skill there for a good boss is being a little bit of a chameleon in terms of being able to adapt to the circumstances and figuring out what's going to be most effective for different teams, but also for different members of a given team to motivate them and keep them aligned to the vision.
David, I want to thank you as always for joining us on the Becker Private Equity Business Podcast. It's always a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on greatness and on bosses. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Scott.